Dear learners, welcome to live teleconferencing session. In this session, we will discuss about risk management. This topic come under the course on MPA 34 Risk Assessment and Vulnerability under the course of Postgraduate Diploma in Disaster Risk Reduction and Management. So, in the context of disaster, normally when we talk about disaster, we always picture like powerful forces of nature like earthquake, floods, or cyclone. That as it is beyond our human control. We always used to think that disasters are beyond our human control, but in reality, disasters are not purely a natural. Okay, it is the combination of the hazard with that human vulnerability and exposure and lack of preparedness, that turns hazard into a disaster. Like for example, hazard is a natural event, earthquake, flood, cyclone, everything is a cloud burst, landslide. It's all about, that it is a natural event, but when it interact with the human vulnerability and when it exposure to that, and the lack of preparedness, then it become a that disaster. For a long time, that disaster management mainly focus upon the response, mainly focused upon the emergency response. Like for example, once the disaster comes, we used to give a rescue, relief, and rehabilitation after the event. While these, while these actions are essential, but they are fundamentally reactive. After the incident, after the disaster. By the time disaster strike, that lives and other assets and everything will become a risk only. So here, what do you mean by risk assessment? Sorry, risk management. Risk management is it's a kind of a critical shift. Okay, instead of disaster waiting to happen, or you can say that it focus upon the identifying underlying risk. What are the underlying risks, and how to reducing the vulnerabilities, and how to integrate that preventive measures into development planning. So this proactive approach help that it used to build resilience, and it used to reduce the economic losses, and also it protect the community from various hazards into disaster. For example, I can tell you one thing. For example, in 1999, a super cyclone hit the Odisha coast. Okay, it made a massive destruction, and it claims more than 10,000 lives. Okay, that time what happened was that is yearly warning systems were limited, and there was a limited shelter, and there was inadequate communities were not fully prepared, so the result was catastrophic. So why it was not prepared that time, that in 1999 we used to deal the disaster in a reactive approach, in the sense after the disaster we used to provide the relief material and all. So what happened? The same thing in 2013 when cyclone Pylon, equally same like a super cyclone, but it has approached the same region in 2013. But what happened is that this time the outcome was remarkably different. The government has invested in yearly warning system, and they have built cyclone shelters, they have trained the communities, and they have planned the massive evacuation also, mass evacuation also. So over a million of people that they have safely evacuated. And so here what you have to notice that in the example, the hazard hasn't changed, the hazard didn't change, the hazard didn't made any change, the same cyclone only, but the cyclone also very powerful only. The what changed the way is that we have approached the risk. Okay, we have did a risk management in a proper manner, and also we did reactive to proactive approach. So here what we can say that is that the risk management is the one of the modern day strategies of managing disaster. Here the problem is like that when you are talking about disaster, now what we are doing that we are we are making communities, we are improving capacity of the community, and so these are the things are happening and all. So before we should understanding disaster risk reduction. Earlier we used to say disaster management, now moving into the risk reduction. Risk reduction in the sense we are reducing the risk. Okay, so normally as I already mentioned that disaster are not natural. Okay, even if the associated hazard, like for example, that shifting the earlier focus from emergency response, that to reducing and managing conditions of hazard, exposure and vulnerability, the impact could be elevated, as the severity of natural hazards cannot be reduced. But that possibility for reducing risk is decreasing vulnerability and exposure. The same thing only, we can reduce the we can reducing the risk by decreasing vulnerability and exposure. Normally disaster management, we always used to one thing, we can't we can't avoid the disaster, but we can manage the disaster. So in this, for reducing risk, what we need is that we have to find out that underlying what are the drivers of risk, what are the drivers of disaster risk, and what are the lesson, the impact of climate change, and preserve the that sustainability of the development. So catastrophic disaster is not the inevitable consequence of a hazard event, and much can be, what we can do that we can reduce the exposure and vulnerability population. People are living in the natural hazards occur, whether frequently or infrequently. So we can avoid that prevent future risk, reducing existing risk, and support the resilience of the society. So what we can do that if you measure the risk, that you can prevent the future risk. If any, that some disaster we can get it through early warning system, for like say example cyclone, say for example flood. So some of the disasters like earthquake we can't prevent it. So some of the disaster we can future risk, and we can reduce the existing risk. The existing risk in the sense like people living in a low lying area, people living in a vulnerable area. So we can address those issues, and we have to bring the resilience of the society. Resilience of the society is bring back to normalcy. Resilience means bring back to normalcy. So how we have to bring back the society into the normal mode after a disaster. So this can be effectively we can manage through the risk management and all. When it comes to policy perspective of disaster risk reduction, so here contribute, like policy aspects in the sense we have to be contribute, strengthen the infrastructure. Strengthen the infrastructure in the sense that people living in the that hazard area, that improve the infrastructure. We can construct a cyclone shelter, we can construct the early warning system, that strong strong building. So these are the things, and the resilience of community. So these are the things. What will happen is that it will lead to, or you can that achieve the sustainable development. So investment in disaster risk reduction is more effective than that that addressing the disaster. So why it is like that? Investing in the risk, it will help us to both political and economic obligation. It will help us to that reduce the disaster risk and all. Here disaster risk is a shared risk, and a business, government, civil society, and everything used to participate in the construction. So DRR is that the disaster risk reduction is essentially a shared value, that it used to be people centric, and it used to be multi-sector approach, because it will help the building resilient to multiple hazard and creating a culture of prevention and safety. So here when it comes to disaster risk reduction aspect, it used to be people centered, and that multi-sector approach. In a multi-sector approach, in the sense you can say that various institutions used to participate, NGOs, government, private sector, that various community-based organizations. So many things used to become, so that when you handle the multi-hazard, and also it creates a culture of prevention and safety. Here we are talking about the framework of disaster risk reduction. So what are the frameworks are there? In the framework, we can say that one is that risk awareness and assessment. Risk awareness and assessment is that when it comes to disaster, first thing we always used to that, don't get panic. Okay, when it comes to disaster, we always used to say that one thing is that don't get panic. So when you are, when will you won't get panic? When you aware about the risk. Okay, when you done the assessment. So first thing is what we have to do this hazard analysis and vulnerability and capacity analysis to identify the risk. Hazard analysis in the sense if you are living in a coastal area or Himalayan area. So you have to find out the what are the existing hazards used to be happen and what are the vulnerable is there and how the capacities are there. So you have to identify the risk. And another thing is that we can say that knowledge development in the sense you can say that the education, training, research and information. So these things will help the that improve the knowledge about the disaster. And another thing is that public commitment and the institutional framework. So what do you mean by public commitment and institutional framework? In the sense that organizational structure, we need organizational structure and policies and legislation and community action for coordinated efforts. Like organizational structure in the sense that in India, we had disaster management is come under the Ministry of Home Affairs. After that, that disaster is managed, that it is managed by there is organization is called the National Disaster Management Authority, and in the state level we have State Disaster Management Authority, and we have a Central Disaster Management, District Disaster Management Authority. So these are the things also there in the institutional structure. When is the policy, we have a disaster management policy and we have a legislation. So many things are also there. So it used to be must. And another thing is that application of measures, like application of measures in the sense environment management, how to manage the environment management, land use planning, urban planning, and what are the critical facility infrastructure we have, and use of science, technology, partnership, networking, and financial instruments. And final thing is that yearly warning system. Yearly warning system is that we have to forecasting and warning dissemination, preparedness measures, reaction capacities. So these are the framework of disaster risk reduction. One is that first thing is that hazard vulnerability capacity analysis. Another thing is that knowledge management. Another thing is that institutional framework and application measures. And last one is the yearly warning system. This is the base of the disaster risk reduction. So when it comes to that Sendai framework, another thing is that Sendai framework in 2015 to 13. In the global level, the post-2015 framework DRR was adopted at the Third World Conference in Disaster Risk Reduction held from 14 to 18 March in Sendai in Japan. They have suggested some framework. They have given us some framework and they have given a timeline also 2015 to 13 global level all the countries has to succeed. So in that first one is that they have given a adapter framework. The adapter framework in the sense that the first thing is that concise, that action oriented, and forward looking, and some kind of each country has to need a DRR framework. And another thing they said that review the Hugo framework. Before Sunday we had a Hugo framework, so we have to assess and complete the Hugo framework and we learn from the experience. So this is the most important one. We always used to learn from the past experiences, that regional, inter-regional and DRR strategies, what are the plans and agreements, so many things are also there. And the foster cooperation. Foster cooperation in the sense, that we have to find out the modalities of the completion of the project. And another thing is the ensure the accountability. So how it will happen is that we have to do periodic review of the frameworks implementation, so that will achieve these things. So these are the 5 frameworks has been suggested by the Sendai framework. It will be a lengthy one, but I have given for a time constraint. I have given for in a manner for our purpose. So far we have seen about disaster risk reduction. Now we are going to discuss about the disaster risk management. So disaster risk management in the sense it aims avoid, reduce and transfer the adverse impacts of natural hazards on people, property, environment through activities, measures of prevention, mitigation and preparedness. So like for example, disaster risk management in the sense that what they are saying that we can avoid, reduce or transfer the adverse impact of hazards. It is a systematic process, that using administrative decision, organization, operational skills and capacities, and to implement policies, to strategies and coping capacities of the society community to lessen the impact of the natural hazards and all. So overall, if you see, these covers, all activities comprising structural, non-structural measures to limit the adverse impact of the natural hazards and all. So whenever that risk management or risk reduction is that lesser the impact of the natural hazards. This is the motto of that only. Like for example, when it comes to disaster risk management, there is three kind of activity used to be there. One is the prevention, and another one is the mitigation, and the preparedness. So prevention is that we can avoid the disaster through preactive measures, and mitigation is the lesser the adverse impact of in the structural and non-structural measures, and the preparedness in the sense enhancing the capacity of the communities and society. So these will help the that address the various hazards and all. When it comes to that disaster risk management, that it involves public administration, decentralization, organizational development, community-based disaster management, engineering, settlement development, land use planning, integrating environment consideration. So all those things, compiling. So it is not about only one thing. It is so we need a administration, we need a decentralization, we need a proper organizational development, we need a community-based disaster strategies, we need a engineering, we need a settlement development, we need a land use planning, and these are the things that integrating in a environmental consideration. So we can say that this it is a all round development and also. So when it comes to DRM, that it undertake various activities like that design, implementation, and it also involve the evacuation strategies, policies, and also. So in the IPCC Intergovernment Panel on Climate Change, they have given us some kind of a policies on the measure. First thing they said that first we have to understand the risk. Okay, as I already mentioned that that hazard vulnerability analysis, and another thing is that reduce the risk and promote preparedness and advance sustainability. So these are the basic objectives. So basic objective is that first we have to understand, analyze the hazard, what are the exposure, how the vulnerability is to be there, and the same time reduce the risk. Reduce the risk is that implement measures to protect lives and assets. And for example, when you are living in a low lying area near the river, you have to that improve the height, and you can remove the that clean that canal. Many things are also there. So we have to implement measure to protect lives and preparedness in guides and response and recovery prepared and also. So mostly we can disaster risk management we can understood as it's a implementation of DRR, and it includes the capacity of the community. So disaster risk management is a kind of a implementation of disaster risk reduction, so that building the capacity of the community. In the disaster risk management, we can say that in the following notions, like first one is the prospective DRM. So prospective disaster risk management is that it used to prevent a new and that increased risk, and it always focus upon the future risk avoidance through disaster risk reduction policies. For example, we can say that we can have a land use planning, disaster resistant, and we can have a water supply system and all. And another thing is that corrective DRM. What do you mean by corrective DRM? Corrective DRM in the sense activities that address it used to seek, remove the, or you can say that reduce the disaster risks which are already present and which need to be managed and reduce the now also. So these are the things, like for example, sometime that critical infrastructure and also there. And another thing is that compensatory or residual disaster risk management. When it comes to compensatory and residual disaster risk management, the activity it used to strengthen the social and economic resilience of the individual and society in the face of residual risk. For example, that we used to have a contingency, national contingency fund, we have a insurance, we have a reinsurance, we have social safety nets. So many things are there. So these will help to reduce the, bring back the socio and economic resilience. We couldn't understand that socio-economic resilience, and when a disaster affects, we used to lose the loss of lives, we used to lose our livelihood, we used to lose our loved ones, we used to lose our infrastructure, we used to lose our jobs. So how to bring back the society, give a, that proper measures and all. In that, where we, that national contingency fund, insurance and credit, these things will help to bring back the socio and economic resilience of the people. So now here I am going to discuss about the disaster management and disaster risk management. So disaster management, in the sense, you can say that, when it comes to disaster risk management, it needs to be better understanding of the disaster preparedness. Here, disaster preparedness, in the sense, we have to focus upon the disaster risk reduction in various way, and also by the defined by this UNDP, disaster management, in the sense, the body of policy and administrative decisions and operational activities which pertain to the various stages of the disaster at all levels. It is the traditional disaster management style. Like, for example, it used to be administrative decisions and operational, these are the things only. It comprises the integration of pre-disaster, during disaster and post-disaster activity. But when it comes to disaster risk management, it comprises of all activities including structural and non-structural measures, or it used to be that what are the various aspects, and it used to bring back the what are the that aspects of hazards. And also, at first glance, it looks like DRR is one of the principle of disaster management, but this has been practiced, and disaster management has been yielded result, less loss of livelihoods and the fewer disaster. So one significant problem in the disaster cycle has been that it has a disaster oriented focus. It based upon the disaster, but in the disaster risk management mostly focus upon the risk. And also, so this means that all activities, all activities and resources towards focus upon the disaster event only. So a focus is mostly that underlying causes of disaster, most cases not considered because of the some kind of a bureaucratic ignorance. And also, earlier disaster management is advocated the casual factors of disaster, like it becomes violent, most of them, and sometimes that due to the vulnerability it has created by the human activity. Another flaw in the application of disaster management cycle is that the disaster management is to be has seen as a phased approach in the sense pre-disaster, during disaster and post-disaster, and these activities used to have a sequential path. So it was mostly appreciated by the each cycle. And also, so now what happened is that we have focused upon the hazard and risk reduction. So we have to provide the investment, we have to give a investment in mitigate and social economic risk, and we have to create a emergency response remains critical, but it is not an insufficient alone. So what used to do is that we have to create a resilient society while ensuring development does not increase vulnerability. Like, for example, here again and again, that resilient. The main thing is that resilient society, when it becomes resilient, is that the people understand about the hazard and their vulnerability and their capacity. So when they are realize that, then it would become a resilient. And also, like when it comes to disaster risk management, there are various components are there. One is that disaster identification, risk identification, and another thing is that recovery and rehabilitation, and capacity building, monitoring and evaluation, and you can say that preparedness and response. So there are various various things also involved in this in the disaster risk management. So if you say simply one thing is that reduce the risk, how to reduce the risk, find out the risk, and you just focus upon the how to reduce the risk and also. So let's conclude towards the key takeaway from the disaster risk management is that the disaster management earlier is the reactive and response driven approach. Now that it is a disaster risk management it is a holistic approach. It used to prevent, preparedness, response, rehabilitation, recovery and mitigation, and it also engaging that diverse sectors and communities and some kind of a robots and resilient framework. So this is the main impact of the disaster risk management. So it mostly focus upon the how to manage the risk and also. So thank you for listening.